episode number 75 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. My guest today is Jill Blakeway. Jill is a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, a licensed and board-certified acupuncturist, and clinical herbalist who has been practicing energy healing for over 20 years. Jill founded the Yenova Center in New York City in 1999 and currently acts as clinical director alongside her husband, Noah Rubenstein. Yenova currently has 3 locations, Flatiron, Brooklyn Heights, and recently opened East Side. As a practitioner, she is known for her intuitive approach to Chinese medicine, and particularly for her skills as an acupuncturist and energy healer. Jill co-authored the best-selling book, Making Babies, a proven 3-month program for maximum fertility, about how to conceive naturally. She also authored a second book about women's sexual health called Sex Again, Recharge Your Libido. Jill's recently published third book, Energy Medicine, The Science and Mystery of Healing, describes what it means personally and scientifically to be an energy healer and draws on cutting-edge research to explain how acupuncture and energy medicine work. Jill traveled the world for 2 years interviewing and apprenticing with top scientists and energy healers to explain the science behind energy healing and how we can use it in our lives to heal illness and live fuller, longer lives. So welcome to the podcast, Jill.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
I'm so excited to have you on. I feel like a fan. You've really brought so much to the fertility world. What you've done is so amazing. So for me, this is just amazing. You've been kind of like a mentor, but from afar, that you've never met me. So it's really nice to meet you.
It's so lovely to meet you too.
So can you share your background? What got you to specialize in fertility? How you got into Chinese medicine and eventually wrote your amazing book, Making Babies, a proven 3-month program for maximum fertility. I'm saying the whole thing.
It's a bit of a mouthful. Yes, I'm a practitioner of Chinese medicine. As you know, I'm an acupuncturist and a herbalist. And when I was training, I met someone who inspired me hugely. Her name was Dr. Ni. She has since sadly passed away. And she was an MD from China who was a gynecologist who was also an acupuncturist. And she was practicing Chinese medicine in San Diego where I was training. And she was the first person who modeled for me being able to integrate it in a way that the patients really benefited. I think in fertility particularly, there are amazing technologies available and in conventional biomedicine, and she brought that together for me, and I was very inspired by her, and I intended to stay near her and train. She was my idea of an amazing doctor. She ran qigong classes in the park in the morning for her patients, and she took soup to sick patients, and she was very tragically killed in a car accident, and it was an incredible loss to our profession. She was doing research with Columbia University into dealing with cervical dysplasia, precancerous cells in the cervix, using herbs and getting really good results.
Oh, wow.
And so I wanted to carry on studying with her. And then after she passed, I moved to New York. And I realized that I had some knowledge from her. I didn't have as much as I wanted to have, but I had some knowledge from her that I could use to really help people. And so many years ago, I started Yenova in 1999, because I'm ancient apparently. But many years ago, I started Yenova, and I just treated the patients in front of me, but I had these skills in gynecology, even though they were somewhat rudimentary at the time, and I wished I'd learnt more from her. And I got going, and that was a long time ago. And I began to develop a reputation for being able to enhance fertility using Chinese medicine. And slowly, the practice took off. And at some point, the New York Times referred to me as a fertility goddess, which is kind of embarrassing, but kind of changed my life, because that's when I got a book deal. And you're right, I wrote a book with a doctor, a reproductive endocrinologist, really modeling what I'd learned from Dr. Nee, which was bringing it all together. That sometimes Eastern medicine is better and sometimes Western medicine is better. For diagnostic issues, Western medicine diagnostics are very precise, but Eastern medicine diagnostics deal in pattern and the way one system interfaces with another. And so we're very useful for imbalances of hormones and things like that. And when we bring it together, it's very powerful.
It is. And that's one of the things that I really liked about this book, because you don't find often books that have both sides. And I also liked the fact that the reproductive endocrinologist, he was a little bit more open-minded. You both were very open-minded, and the way you worked and communicated was really like holistic between the two of you guys. And I also loved how you use the patterns, the Chinese medicine patterns, but relay it in a way that's very relatable to everybody.
It was harder to do than it looked, and we got it very simple in the end. But you can probably imagine I had like 12 patterns to start with, and I sort of honed it down. But what we wanted to do, both from an Eastern and a Western medical perspective, we knew, Dr. David and I, that our patients have different issues, and there isn't one fertility problem. So we wanted to group them into 5 groups and give them specific advice to their group. And that's what we did. So in Making Babies, for people who haven't read it, you take a quiz. You can take it online at unovacenter.com at my practice. You take a quiz and you find out what type you are. You can also just take it in the book and add it up. And then you follow a 3-month program for your type. And it's always very gratifying. On difficult days, I go to Amazon and I read over and over again, hundreds and hundreds of reviews where people say, I did what they said in the book and it worked. And I've been trying to get pregnant for ages and it worked. And it was because we brought our knowledge together. And thank you for noticing. We were very open-minded with each other, because the patients do best when we all get our egos out of the way and just work together and pool our knowledge. So we pooled our knowledge on everything. And then there is something about splitting people up into these groups that really works. And we thought it would when we wrote it. We were pretty sure it would, but it's been very gratifying to find out that it does. And it is the basis of what we do at Unova. And you and I are recording this while we're all quarantined because of the pandemic. But the Unova team are continuing to do fertility counseling online, because I've worked with many of these people for over 12 years. And what they're really great at is identifying someone's specific pattern and then providing herbs and making vitamin suggestions and dietary suggestions to suit their specific pattern of disharmony, rather than a sort of one size fits all approach.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what is so amazing, is because it really treats the patient and the person. Whereas, especially why some of these diet fads don't work. They work so well for somebody and they're like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. But it's their body type. It just happens to work with their body type. And so that's the whole idea really behind both Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. It's about looking at the elements within each person.
And there is, as you know, there is no one fertility problem. The reason someone isn't conceiving is different to someone else. And I often get patients who come in and they're taking something that they heard of on the internet. Chaseberry comes to mind.
Yes.
And they say it's a fertility herb. And, we chat about it. But obviously there isn't a fertility herb, just like there isn't any specific fertility drug. There are herbs that address specific problems. And what you need is a herbal formula that addresses your specific problem. And that's what we're good at Unova. And I think that's why we've grown. We have 3 centers in New York, all of which are closed at the moment. But we have a team that we've kept paying because they're such specialists that I want to resource them. And we're good at identifying your pattern of disharmony and then telling you what you specifically need to do to restore balance.
what really sets apart Chinese medicine, why it's been so amazing for so many years. It's never gone out of style. It's something that just keeps proving the test, proving itself throughout the test of time.
Yes, well, our colleagues, in Wuhan, as this started, were telling us what was working and what wasn't herbally. And I'm not saying there are any quick fixes for this pandemic by any means, but they were using Chinese herbs alongside antivirals and other biomedical pharmaceuticals to very good effect. And it just shows me that Chinese medicine is able to confront a new problem by doing, good pattern diagnosis and understanding the pattern of disharmony. And our colleagues in China were coming up with both prophylactic formulas and formulas to take patients head off the disease at all the stages it goes through. They'd identified 5 major stages, and they were coming up with formulations to meet them. So I believe that we have an important role to play in medicine, and that's why I wrote the book with Dr. David, that I think more and more MDs are understanding that we can bring this together in a way that's very innovative and help people get the best of both worlds, that it isn't dogma, that there isn't an either or going on. That really there's just medicine.
That's right.
All sorts of different medicine.
Yes.
And if we bring our knowledge base together, I mean, I have a doctorate in Chinese medicine. I teach at the doctoral level. I have things to say, but I don't have all the answers, obviously. But if we bring our knowledge together, our hive mind, we can navigate ourselves and our patients through most things, I think.
Yes, 100%. And I think that it is so important for us to just practice the medicine. It's all about just the medicine. So I read your book, Energy Medicine. I'll say the full one because I know there's a couple of books that say energy medicine. So it's Energy Medicine, The Science and Mystery of Healing. And I absolutely loved it. I listened to it actually because I can't read. I'm a mom and I have my work, so it was difficult for me to actually read books. But I listened to the audiobook and love your accent, love the whole book. I mean, it was just so intriguing. I was amazed at how relevant it was. I really related to it so much as a practitioner, and it's subtle. Energy is so subtle. And I think that is why we haven't really acknowledged it much in life, because it's not material. It's not something that we can see per se. We almost have to close our eyes and go within to really feel it and connect with it. And I think it is something that you start to pick up on after years of practicing healing with other people. And it's interesting because I also spoke to a Qigong master a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the whole idea of us draining our energy is actually a myth. He said that when we're healing, we're connecting to the source energy. And what's interesting is I haven't had acupuncture, I don't know if that's good or bad, on myself since I've been practicing as much. My amount that I've been getting is a lot less, but I felt that through healing other people, I was also feeling healed. And it's just an interesting thing that you start to pick up on as you do it. So I so appreciated how eloquent you put it and how you did research and put it all together. I want to first talk about what inspired you to write the book.
Well, thank you. And thank you for listening to it. I know what that's like when you're busy and you're multitasking. And you're right. This is my 3rd book. My 2nd book was called Sex Again and about libido. And when you get to your 3rd book, they let you read it yourself.
So I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I got to. They trust you enough to let you read it yourself. It's always easier actually for an actor to read it. But I
love when the author reads it, actually.
I think so, because we feel it very deeply. And I spent 3 days in a recording studio in New York recording it with a lovely sound engineer and a producer and a director who kept me on track. So thank you for listening to it. It was, as you said, in some ways a very personal journey. This is my most personal book. I wanted to explain me to me as an acupuncturist. I knew that patients thrived under my care, and I wanted to know why. I mean, obviously I know Chinese medicine works, but I wanted to know a little bit about that mystery that happens. And I wanted to be able to explain it scientifically. And so what HarperCollins did, and this is the first time a book on energy medicine has ever been published by a mainstream publisher. They're usually published by alternative publishers. So they wanted a book for skeptical people. They wanted a book with scientific references that made sense of a sort of often misunderstood practice. And that's what I set out to do. And as you can imagine, it was the most joyous of commissions. I mean, I can't be more grateful to HarperCollins for letting me wander around the world talking to healers, mystics, scientists about what is the energy that heals us, what are the prompts that a human being needs to be tipped into self-healing, which is really what that is. And when people ask me what qi is in Chinese medicine, I always think of it as our body's intelligence, and kind of the bit we take for granted. You know, if you have a couple of glasses of wine, your body starts to your liver kicks into action. If you get an insect bite, you know, your body's inflammatory response comes in order to take away poisons. That your body is extraordinarily intelligent and keeps trying to push you back into balance. Now, when we get sick, we go too far out of balance and our body's self-regulating abilities stop being able to work. And that's where Chinese medicine comes back in, because we're very good at restoring balance. And we do it with Chinese herbs, we do it with acupuncture, and all the other modalities at our disposal, cupping and lifestyle advice and dietary advice. But we're also energy workers. And I feel like we got ashamed of that. We thought it was woo. We're licensed and board certified. We wanted to be part of the medical system. I wrote a book with a doctor. I've already told you how much I like it when we integrate. And so I was hiding that bit of me. But as I got more experienced, I got better and better at the energetics of it. And so I wanted to know what was happening. And as you know from the book, I submitted my own body to science, and they did an EEG of my brain and an EKG of my heart, which is a measure of the energy field of the brain and the heart. And what happens when I'm doing acupuncture is that my heart and my brain go into resonance. It's called heart-brain coherence, and it means they go at the same frequency. And to do that, I slow my brain down quite a lot. And then interestingly, the patient's heart goes into the same frequency as mine.
So amazing.
Which is measurable and scientifically measurable, but also beautiful and
so
heartfelt and about love. And they think that at that point where we're all going at the same frequency, where my brain has slowed down and and is going at the same frequency of my heart, and the patient's brain has slowed down and their heart is going at the same frequency as mine, that's when information gets passed from one person to another. It's almost like we're then calm enough to receive. And you mentioned the Qigong master, and I agree with him. I interviewed an enormous amount of healers during the course of writing this book, and every now and again I would come upon one who said, "This really drains me." And I began to think they weren't, I don't want to say they're doing it wrong, but they weren't fully open yet. Because for me, this energizes me. I open myself up to a matrix of energy that is so much bigger than myself, that in Chinese medicine or in Chinese philosophy, we would call the Tao, sort of an intelligent matrix of energy that is our container as human beings. And so it makes me feel calm, and it resources me. And so I'm like you, I don't get much acupuncture because, you know,
you're too busy giving it.
Too busy giving it. Yeah. But I do feel like I get a treatment from the Tao, that I get resourced by the Tao every time I treat a patient. And I can do that by doing acupuncture, I can do that by doing hands-on healing, and I can do that at a distance. So, you know, you and I are resonating at this point. And in the book, I show that when one person is interviewing another, that the other person's heart waves start to show up in the other person's brain waves, which is
I felt it as you were speaking about it. And I said, well, I'm feeling this, which is kind of cool, because I've always really looked up to you, and this is a very cool opportunity for me to connect in this.
I'm so happy to talk to you. It's lonely at home.
I know. And it's kind of cool because, you know, after doing this podcast, I do get some emails saying, oh, you don't realize how this has inspired me. So I know how it feels when somebody hears you don't realize how your book has inspired people and what you've done. You don't realize it until you're being told. So I understand how that impacts you. You're like, wow, this is kind of cool, because it is a message of the heart. And I could see it with you. You're all heart. I could see that joy and that connection, that you have that connection. So it is something that you really feel is coming from an amazing place. What's interesting to me is, as you were talking about that, I'm thinking about the synchronicity, how energy starts to become organized. There's chaotic and organized energy, and healing is a very organized energy. And that synchronicity of the heart and the mind, as we know, Chinese medicine has been saying this all along, how our heart houses the mind, and how we connect with others. And even just thinking about healing, even just having this conversation, I feel like when I have conversations like this, the energy level increases, becomes more refined. There's a difference in the feel of the conversation. Whereas if you compare that to just like mundane information, I have to go get the groceries, there's a difference in energy level. So I was wondering with you, like, what was the most surprising information that you've gotten from doing this project, like the book?
Well, there was so much. There were so many things where I tell people this book wrote me rather than I wrote the book. I didn't know the journey I was going to go on when I started. Of course, I told HarperCollins that I had it all under control. I was like, yes, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. And then I remember writing to the editor halfway through and saying, I'm a little off track, but it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very lovely. Julie Wills, she's a fabulous editor. And she was like, keep going. And I was like, I will. So I had no idea what I was in for. And one of the stories, though, that I tell that people are most surprised by is about a man called Dr. William Bengston, Bill, who is a professor at City University in New York. So he's on my doorstep. And I did already know him, but I dedicated an entire chapter to Bill because Bill is a scientist, and he's a true scientist. He just likes to do experiments. He always teases me that because I'm a clinician, he's like, your problem is you care about people rather than science.
Right.
Just like what works, whereas scientists like to prove it. We're kind of seeing that in the country now, that sort of dichotomy between people saying maybe this will work and the scientists saying, we need to prove it.
Right.
And the world needs all of us.
Yeah.
So Bill learned a sort of rather odd energy healing technique from a psychic healer and decided to take it into the lab. And to start with, he did the experiment himself, and he got mice that are specially bred to have cancer, poor mice. And those mice always, they get injected with cancer and they always die on day 27. And that's how pharmaceuticals are tested, because if you can keep one of those mice alive till day 30, you know that you're making some impact. And I know this sounds sad, but I want to reassure people watching at home that these particular mice have a happy ending. I just think I should tell you that now, because otherwise it's really sad. So he gave the mice breast cancer. They injected breast cancer into these mice that are specially bred to be vulnerable to cancer. And they all lived. And they didn't just live till day 30, they completely recovered. They looked worse for a while, and then they got better. And interestingly, when they re-injected them with cancer, they couldn't get it. Something about their immune systems had been permanently changed. And then Bill did what I think any reputable scientist would do. He wondered if this was replicable, because science is only useful if it's replicable. Yeah, we stand on each other's shoulders, right. And we make scientific progress that way. So there's no point in having a special someone somewhere who can do something but nobody else can see them. And in fact, in my section on charlatans in the book, the most disreputable healers I met all considered themselves to be a special someone somewhere. With and that was part of how they were manipulating people. Whereas I think the true healers know that this is our birthright. We're all, we all have access to this, and that's why, incidentally, in the book I wrote lessons so that you can learn to be your own healer. I'm not remotely special. I know I'm not, and I can do this, so you can do this. So Bill gathered together a group of skeptical students and colleagues, and they did the experiments again, and they still worked. It didn't matter who did it. He could teach this technique to anyone, and then they would be able to heal the mice. And that is extraordinary. The fact that it's replicable is extraordinary. So I dedicated an entire chapter 4 of the book, to Bill and these extraordinary mice. And in fact, I saw Bill last week before we were all quarantined.
Oh, wow.
A week ago. We were, Goop did a day-long conference based on my book, and Bill came and lectured in LA, and it was extraordinary fun to see him. And he has continued doing amazing research into the frequency that this information, he calls it information rather than energy, because energy dissipates over a distance and this doesn't, but he's continuing to do research into how this works and why it works.
It's so fascinating. It really is amazing to actually be able to see it and prove it in science. And I feel like science is finally catching up, and we're actually able to see all the things that we've been saying, or the sages have been saying for centuries. So what's interesting to me too, I really loved the part where you mentioned global consciousness, and how when you have world events, that there's a certain, I'm not like all scientific, so I don't remember the exact details, but it was like kind of like an algorithm that was picked up in the world every time there was a global event, or it was something that everybody knew about. Now, what's interesting to me, it's just so fascinating that now is the first time that we're really all sharing in this global event. Every single person on the globe is experiencing this right now. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you feel is happening.
It's an extraordinary time. And this story starts back at Princeton University in the 1970s, where they had a female grad student who wondered if she could create a machine that could be moved by the human mind. Now, this was in the engineering department, which I always think must be the least woo department at Princeton, don't you think? Because they actually make machines.
Right.
And the head of engineering, the dean of engineering, was at the time a man called Dr. Robert Jahn. I interviewed him for this book, and he has since sadly died. He was very elderly when I interviewed him, so I was lucky enough to be able to meet him. And he didn't think for a moment that this woman was going to be able to pull this off, but he thought it was a good grad school project, that she would have to think through how you would design a machine that could be moved with the human mind, and that was an interesting grad school project. So he offered to supervise her project, and she went off and she pulled it off. And she created something called a random event generator. And to cut a long story very short, thanks to decaying atomic material, this machine spits out random numbers. And what she found was that when someone focused on it with feeling, the numbers became less random. When more than one person focused on it with the same feeling, they became much less random. The effect was increased. So to give you an idea, they had random event generators all over the world at different universities. They set up a lab at Princeton, especially to study this, because it was such anomalous and fascinating data. And so they had these random event generators just spitting out numbers back to Princeton all over the world. And on September the 11th, 4 hours before the planes hit the Twin Towers, they started all over the world to become less random. And that continued for the whole day as the entire world looked in the same direction, feeling the same emotions. And people have asked me why 4 hours before, and to be honest, I don't know. Nobody knows. People have used it to try and discredit the research, but I don't think. I think that's a mistake. I think that's cynicism and confirmation bias in the other direction. It may be that the event had already started, in that these people were already heading to the airports. It may be that time isn't linear in the way that we think it is. And it may be a sense of collective premonition, and it may be a combination of all those three. I don't really know, but you could see it. The data was clear. And since then, they've created little portable REGs, we call them, random event generators, and they've taken them everywhere, to the Trump inaugural and yoga studios and churches and places where people gather feeling the same thing. And here's what they found. They found that love and compassion makes the biggest effect, but fear also has a profound effect. It unites people and it spreads like a virus. And I wrote about this in the book, not knowing that we were going to come to this time. But I've thought about it a lot since this pandemic started. You know, that there is an enormous amount of fear, understandably, an enormous amount of unknown, which I get because I'm anxious myself in ways. You know, I'm trying to resource my colleagues through this. I don't want to make people unemployed. You know, I have worries and stresses on me. But what I learned from writing this book is that fear is a very contractive energy. So if I allow fear to permeate the Inova Center, we will contract. And we're going to contract anyway because we're in the middle of a pandemic, but we'll contract quicker. And love is a very expansive energy, compassion. So I have been asking myself, what would love do? Love would continue to pay our staff even though we're not earning, for instance, and we're doing it. And there's part of me, to wax philosophical for a second, that believes so deeply, having written this book, that we are living in a matrix of intelligent energy, that believes that there is intelligence to this, and that if we connect to it, if we allow source energy to run through us at this moment, and we ask ourselves, what would love do? Love would shop for elderly neighbors. Love would connect in community. Love would do what you do and put out a podcast and connect your community at this time. Love would have this conversation. Love would make me available to have this conversation. If we keep asking ourselves that question and answering, we will be in line with the intelligence that runs through the universe, and which is abundant, and we will be resourced. We may not get everything we want. We know, you know, we're not going to get rich, any of us. I mean, some people will, but we're not.
Amazon Prime.
Yes. Yeah, obviously some people are more in demand than others, but we will be resourced. And I told my team this morning, I had a Zoom meeting, and I said that as long as Unova is of service to people, and as long as we keep that goal in mind, I believe we'll be resourced. And, you know, so we will continue doing what we do. We'll do it virtually. We have a ton of wisdom to offer people. We're all very experienced practitioners, and we'll, you know, come through this. But that's how I've been seeing it, having written the book and having thought deeply about the Global Consciousness Project and the Pear Lab at Princeton and what these studies show us.
And what have you seen anything about the random event generators now?
No, but I haven't really looked outside my own community, a bit like a lot of people. I was like, okay, so I have to get my family settled.
Yeah.
And I have to get my Unova team settled, and I have to switch us all to digital in a really quick way. And we're coming up with some really cool stuff. We've always wanted to write a digital fertility course based on making babies and our experience as practitioners, and we're going to be doing that. And so I've been generating material, and I haven't checked in. It's run now by a man called Roger Nelson at the Global Consciousness Project. So you can go to their website, and at some point when I resurface and start broadening my outlook again, I will check in with them, because I think it'd be very interesting to see. I think fear is debilitating, and it you know, you just think what you do when you're frightened. You tighten up, you get
You
tight, you
can't
don't.
move.
Yes, you freeze. And what this is requiring of us is to be very nimble. Yeah, we have to be sharp, and we have to have ideas and things like that. I told my husband yesterday because it was it was a sunny day in upstate New York. I said, I'm going to lie on the grass and I'm going to just be inspired. And I think inspiration is called after that in-breath for a reason. Yeah, and we can't hear inspiration. I think it comes from outside of us. I think we're tapping into that matrix of collective energy that we live in. And we can't hear it if we're running around tight and scared.
Yes.
And we need to slow down. Clearly, the world has now got the message that we are going to slow down.
Yeah.
And we need to take advantage of this time to be receptive to our next step. Or as Neil Donald Walsh, who is in chapter 2 of my book, because he mentored me, and is the author of Conversations with God, which would be an awesome book to reread at the moment, or read if you haven't read it. I think I should reread it. But he always says,
we should make a book club.
Yes, we should have a book. Well, we have a book club at Unova.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
We have a book club, and I think it's meeting on Zoom this week. If you go to the Unova website,
it's
all about uteruses this week, and the politics of uteruses. And our nurse practitioner stroke acupuncturist Brittany Griffith is leading us all in a Unova book club meeting. And you should go even if you you haven't read the books. They always have such interesting discussions. The Unova team are really smart. But what Neil says, I digress there. But what Neil says is, how are you going to create the next greatest and grandest version of yourself? And I think life is creative. And I think that is an interesting question as we sit here having been dealt an enormous curveball, the whole lot of us. You know, given this new information, who am I now? Who am I going to be through this clear crisis? And how will I create the next greatest and grandest version of myself? And I think this is not a time to play small. Do you know what I mean? We're home, so our lives got smaller. But I think we should play big and meet this rather than shrink away from it. And I think that is what I got from all those studies in my book about the ways we connect.
Yes. And we were speaking before in the pre-talk about the Tao, which every time you say it, I get the chills, because there's something so vast about it, and how we came from such a young society and we're forced to go yin. And that's really what happens. You know, also, I've seen it with our own bodies. We run ourselves ragged. Our bodies say, hey, you got to stop this. You're going to get the flu. You get the flu, and it forces you to stay home and rest and listen to the body. And this is happening now on a global scale. It's asking us to draw within. And I think it's so interesting, as you were talking about inspiration, I always get the visual of like antennas. You know, we have antennas that tune in to different energy, and inspiration, like you said, is like, it's almost like a whisper. We need to get quiet in order to connect with it and to feel it. So it's just such an interesting thing, because it gets us to think about so much. And I think that it's a good thing to think about all these things and to allow ourselves to see, what is this giving us? You know, and it's true, we do have the simultaneous fear and love happening at the same time. So it's such a lesson.
In spiritual teachers, and Neil Donald Walsh being one of them, always say that we came to the earth to experience duality. And then, of course, we don't like it because it's hard.
Confusing.
And in Chinese philosophy, you know, every ancient culture had an understanding of an energy that animates us. And we lost that over the years. But if you think about it, the Greeks had pneuma, and in India there was prana, and in China there was qi. And one of the things about qi is that it is our personal energy field. And it's the idea that we have that we are energy made dense, you know, like everything else in the universe. We are vibrating, and our solidity is not quite as solid as we think it is, and that we are energy in the physical. And in Chinese philosophy, that energy comes out of the Tao. And the saying, as you know from the Tao Te Ching, is that the Tao that can be spoken of is not the real Tao, that it is so vast that you cannot find words to speak of it. And of course, that is the last line of my book. I start with it and I end with it, because the Tao that can be spoken of is not the real Tao. It's huge. But there is a very complex matrix of energetic connection that we are both adding to and taking from. And that would be the Tao. And we are aspects, we come out of the Tao. It's kind of our creation story. We come out of the Tao and we become physical, like little ripples in the Tao. And then we die back down again,
Right.
like little ripples in the Tao. And we go back to the Tao, to the large matrix of energy. And that is deeply rooted in our medicine as practitioners of Chinese medicine. But I see it very clearly now that, you know, that we come out of the Tao and we experience yin and yang, two opposite energies that form a whole. And as you know, yin and yang balance each other up at the whole time. And when yin becomes deficient, yang becomes extensive. And yin is all those aspects in your body that are moistening and cooling and nourishing, and yang is all those aspects that are activating and transformational and warming. And that is true in the Tao too, in the universe that we live in. And they always balance each other up. And in fact, my second book, Sex Again, was about balancing that up sexually and also in your relationship. And it doesn't mean that women have to be particularly yin. It's always been a misnomer that yin is feminine and yang is masculine. We all have yin and yang in us in various balances. But in a relationship, you have to balance up yin and yang. I know when I was building Unova, I was really, really busy. So I was very young and out in the world. And my lovely husband, Noah, who is the clinic director at Unova, became more yin temporarily. He did more childcare when our daughter was small, and more feeding of everybody and nourishing, because I was doing more expansion and noise and transformation. And then we had to come back into balance because he started to get unbalanced himself. He started to feel too yin, and so we had to pull it back. So even as a couple, you balance yin and yang. So as a world, we are, as a universe, as a planet, yin and yang will always come back into balance. And I do think that that is what's happening. We are having a period of quiet and retreat. And it's hard because we lived in such a young society, and we came to a very abrupt halt, and that was not fun for any of us at all. But there is some intelligence to this, and that doesn't mean that this is great, because it's not. It sucks for so many people. You know, people who got laid off immediately, who didn't have employers who said, what would love do? You know, this is genuine hardship. But if you look at the entirety, we are in a sort of rebalancing, and it's happening whether we like it or not, I think. And it'll be interesting to see how we come out of that.
Yeah, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking what's cool about you and your husband is that you allowed that shift to happen, whereas a lot of times people might resist it and say, oh no, this isn't really for me, but you kind of you went with it, the two of you. And I think because of that, it keeps for a healthy relationship. So how can we allow this, whatever's happening? We had spoken about this in the pre-talk about resisting versus just kind of riding that wave and allowing it to be what it is. And if we resist it, we'll create more suffering for ourselves, more fear.
We will. I mean, it just is. And making peace with what is a very hard thing. And it doesn't mean we're stuck like this forever. And, you know, when I counsel fertility patients, if they are at war with what is, it's really hard for them to open up and see what can be, you
Yes.
know, I totally get it. Do you know what I mean? And so we go through in our counseling a stage where we get it all out on the table, because it's not fair. Yeah, you're trying to get pregnant, you're doing all the right things. There are people out there who are doing all the wrong things, who seem to get pregnant at the drop of a hat. You'd be an amazing parent, and there you are, not being able to get pregnant. That is obviously, you're entitled to be furious.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
you're entitled to rage, and you're entitled to be hurt, and you're entitled to say, why me, and go through all of those things. But I always encourage people not to get stuck there, because it stops you taking the next right step. And the next right step may be right there. While you're just raging about what is, it's hard to see what can be. And so very gently and with much love and understanding, because I would be exactly the same as my patients in this situation, I try to move them into possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sort of what's happening here. We're being thwarted. You know, there are things we want to do. That there were things. I was just about to start making a TV show about the book, and I was really excited. And a couple of weeks ago, I was at Goop in LA doing a conference on the book, and then Unova had, still has, but they're empty, 3 beautiful centers, in New York, and 28 practitioners, and we just got skidded to a halt in a way we didn't expect. In the same way that our fertility patients, when they try to get pregnant and think everything's going to be great, and then it isn't, get skidded to a halt. And so we go through a period of grieving, and then acceptance, and then I think innovation.
Innovation. Oh my God, that word came into my mind before you said it. Then we definitely are connected.
We are connected now. We can do this. We can meet people online. We can counsel our communities online. But I think, the minute you get some acceptance, you start to get a yes to your situation, then you start to get into possibility about what you can do and what you can create. And so I think that is our opportunity. I don't want to be all sunny and say, oh, this is such a blessing, because obviously it's not a blessing. The economy is in enormous trouble. People are getting sick. Elderly people and vulnerable people will die. Some people who seem healthy will die. And this is a painful situation for us to find ourselves in as human beings. And obviously we're going to be anxious. But I think I always tell my patients this: getting present is the key to living in anxiety. This moment is usually dealable with. And what makes us anxious is either the past or the future. I'm anxious about how I'm going to pay my mortgage. But this moment is fine, and the next moment. And so I think we're being called to get present, and then become very innovative about how we respond.
Yeah, such wise words. And I wanted to also address or touch upon intention. So you talk about intention and how powerful that could be for healing ourselves and others. Can you talk about your experience with intention, what you feel intention is, and why it's so important?
I mean, in Chinese medicine, we say where your mind goes, your qi follows. So in making babies, I created visualizations so that you would direct your energy to that part of your body. And visualizations may seem kind of hokey or something, but they really work over your energy fields. And in the book Energy Medicine, I give visualizations for grounding and protecting and shielding yourself and filling yourself with source energy, because you can manipulate your energy field with your mind. And all those experiments that we talked about at the beginning of this show, where people's heart waves showed up in other people's brain waves, there was a really interesting experiment at the University of Connecticut where they put 2 separate people in 2 separate MRIs, and when one thought about the other, their brainwaves synced up.
That's
and
amazing.
that's I know,
amazing.
it's amazing. It gives me chills. And that's that feeling that we all have when we think about someone and then they call us. Yeah.
Yes.
Or they
Yeah.
text us. Yeah.
Mhm.
Happens all the time. Everybody's like, oh, yeah, that happens to me.
Yeah.
What happens to me as a practitioner is I think about a patient I haven't seen for a decade, and then they're on my schedule the next week out of the blue.
Oh,
And
cool.
they were thinking about me.
Yeah.
So our thought waves create energy that creates change. That's what those Princeton studies are pointing to. That's what Bill's mice experiments that we talked about are pointing to. That's what's happening in the clinic when I'm emptying my head and getting into internal heart-brain coherence. We are changing our reality with our thoughts. Now, it's complicated because we all have thoughts and our reality is a shared collective reality. But there is no doubt that we can impact the next step. And the call to action for us, and it isn't easy, and it's not easy for me at all. I'm not remotely evolved. I have my moments of total freak out. The call to action is to be expansive and loving and compassionate.
Yeah.
And not to contract, because as we expand, we will expand our world. And to say yes to things, because
Isn't
we
that,
have nowhere it's going.
I think about Wu Wei, and I love Wu Wei. It's like my
Yeah.
favorite thing ever. And it's a practice, and it's something that I've always intended for my life, is to allow this effortless effort. Of course, like you had just said, I'm not 100% on that practice. I mean, I want to be, but of course I have my moments. But I try to remind myself and make it a practice every day of allowing. It's just
Yes.
allowance and surrender to this moment, this effortless effort to go and ride that wave. And what's
Yes.
interesting too is, if you think about the body, of course you're working and you're learning about the body. We know that every single part of the body, everything that happens within the body serves a purpose. So why wouldn't our ability to visualize, our imagination serve a purpose? Do we even know? I mean, we're scratching the surface now. We're starting to realize that even our imaginations have a purpose, and
Yes.
utilizing it in a certain way can actually serve a purpose. So that's what's so interesting about this, is that we haven't delved into that aspect of us as a humanity.
Yes, and we've been given an opportunity to. I think we're using only a tiny fraction of our powers. As you know, in the book, I went to Japan to meet two very extraordinary healers who had been studied by San Francisco State University. So I had some data on them. And one of them was a man in Fukuoka, which is on an island off the south coast of Japan. And he's a yogi. And he was fascinating because he had been Mr. Japan in 1979. He was in his 80s, and he had been a bodybuilder, and he showed me pictures of himself with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it was kind of extraordinary. But he at some point decided to develop his insides as much as his outsides, and he went to India to study yoga for many years before coming back to Japan. And he is a highly developed and disciplined yogi. And what I observed, he's a healer and a very, very competent one. But he is able to expand his consciousness so that it's bigger than his body. That is what he has learned to do. And he's one of the most expansive people I've ever met, and one of the most joyful. And he was extraordinarily psychic. He could pick up on things. He was picking up information from the Tao in ways that I had never seen before. And I remember saying to him, Sensei, which is master in our tradition, I want to come back and study with you. And he said, oh, don't worry, I think I'm going to live to be 110. And I was like, okay.
And he probably will.
He was one of the few people I was
Amazing.
like, well, I possibly believe him. Maybe I don't have to hurry back to Fukuoka. Although I very much would like to go and study with him. He was extraordinarily generous with information, and he didn't have any kind of what I call guru drama at all. And he was in a simple yoga studio in Fukuoka, healing people who knocked on the door.
That's so amazing.
Yeah, awesome.
So cool. I was so intrigued by all the stories, and I was like, oh my God, she's so lucky that she gets to meet these people, because it's so fascinating. And I'm sure just being around him and around some of these people, you pick up on that energy, and it automatically, you sync up with it, which is just by itself so fascinating and amazing.
Well, yes, as you know in the book, I went to Japan to see a monk called Hiroyuki Abe, who is a profoundly good healer. And I heard about him from San Francisco State. And I talked to a patient who had met with Hiroyuki Abe. And this was a man in Israel called Yuval Oded. He's on the record in my book. And he was a research psychologist, so not given to sort of flights of fantasy. And but they'd had a baby that was born blind, and they had taken the baby to meet with Hiroyuki Abe in Kobe, Japan. And they took the baby in, and not much happened to start with, and they were beginning to doubt. And then one day they pushed him out, and he screwed up his eyes, and they realized he could see. And when I talked to Yuval, the little boy was 4 and was doing well. So I went off to meet with Hiroyuki Abe, who was an extraordinary character, very funny, very gregarious, not how I expected a monk to be. Not that I've met many monks, to be honest.
And he was a smoker, right?
Yeah, he smoked and he drank, and he was an enormous amount of fun. He had a big entourage of students, but I learned a great deal from him. He took a while for him to trust me, so I followed him around, being his friend along with his entourage for quite some time. We were on trains, off trains. It was a huge adventure, and then I watched him work. And one day he held my hand while I did acupuncture and put energy through my hand into the needle. And I was like, oh, I am such a baby. I have so much to learn. Because suddenly I felt the flow of that energy and the direction of it and the strength of it. And as you know, at the end of the book, he offered to open my chakras, and I was a little cavalier about this, like a Westerner probably would be. Yeah, and I have lived in Southern California. I was like, sure, open my chakras. And he started to do it, and I realized, oh, whoa, I could feel him in my body, and I realized I was doing something much bigger. My husband has a video he made of it, and Hiroyuki Abe is grimacing and pulling, and I'm moving around, and it was all quite more than I had understood I was taking on. And I was in a room full of his students, and when I opened my eyes, when this was over, it took several minutes, I never completely saw the world the same way again. All I can tell you is I saw his students and their beautiful faces, and I saw that light, and I saw that we were made up of light. And we do have measurable light in every cell of our body. It's called biophotons. And interestingly, cancer cells lose their light, which is a sort of interesting anomaly. And I began to see how much we were made of light. And I didn't, I adapted. I didn't just continue to see everybody as just light from then on, because that would have been very inconvenient. I went back, but I never completely went back. And I began to see the light in all of us as precious, precious human beings, that we are reflections of a greater light. And interestingly, when I got to the end of my book, I recapped. You have to work out how to finish somehow. And so I thought, well, I'll go back to everybody and ask them again, what is the energy that heals us? And so I did. And Bill Bengston, Dr. William Bengston, the man from City University who had done the mice studies, is the most granular scientist I interviewed. He's literally in the lab doing studies on this. And I expected him to give me an answer that involved wave and frequency and information that is carried by a wave and a particle. And I was waiting for that. And he said to me, it's love, Jill. Oh, it's love.
Yeah.
And I thought back to the way my heart connects measurably with patients in the clinic. And I realized it's love.
It is. Oh my God. I just got the chills. This is such an amazing conversation. You've given so much already, but do you have any tips for the listeners who aren't able to afford healers or practitioners, something that they can take away?
Yes, I do. I know that people's incomes have been dramatically reduced. And when I wrote Energy Medicine, I did not know this was going to happen, but I very much wanted to give people the message, you are your own healer. You can do this. There are no special people. There are people with lots of experience, and, there are people who've done it for a long time, and they're very useful. But you're going to sit at home for a while, you can learn. So if you can afford a copy of Energy Medicine, there are classes all the way through it. But just know that you have autonomy over your field and that it changes. And the way I start every session is to ground myself. And I imagine putting a great big grounding cord into the earth and securing it and letting it make me feel heavy. And then I open up the top of my head in my mind, and I imagine a great big ball of beautiful, shiny, glittery energy. That is my own energy. It's my connection to source. It's my creativity. It's my higher power. It's my connection to God, whatever you want to say about it. And I bring that beautiful, beautiful energy back through my whole body. Now, source is always in us, but this is a way of making sure that we're connected. And I let it flood my whole body. And I sit in this grounded place, filled with my own light. And when you do that, know that this is how Chinese medicine sees human beings, that we are the connection between heaven and earth. We are the Tao made temporarily physical. We are ripples in the Tao, temporary ripples in the Tao, and that we sit between heaven and earth in this way. And when you are balanced like this, a bit like me being balancing my heart and my mind when I'm working, you are at your most receptive. And with every in-breath, you can receive wisdom. And if you sit like that every day, you will find that if you put your hands together like this, you'll start to be able to feel energy in your hands. You can start to put intention into this. I call it a chi ball that you're making when you do this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you can start to run that up your spine and out. And we're getting a little mystical now, and it's so weird for me because I'm also very sciencey, and that's why I write these books that are a combination of mysticism and science, of course. But I would put your next intention for your life out there in that chi ball and see what happens.
Yeah,
I'm really interested in what happens.
I'm gonna do that.
You let me know.
I will. I love this. I just have, you know what, I know this might sound very forward, but I have such love for you. I just feel like such a beautiful connection with you. You are just you're just so love. And I just feel so many things in my mind go crazy. I get inspired. And so I get all these different things that come to my mind. I see you as somebody who has chosen a path in her life to heal others. And at the same time, while you did that, you created an opening for this Tao wisdom, intelligence to run through your body. And then you're constantly inspired to give the right words to uplift. It's this like circuit that is happening and created such an evolution within you. I just see you're beautiful.
Thank you. I did this entire book tour without any kind of talking points or a script. When you go on book tour, a publicist gives you talking points, and you do your talking points and things. And that's how I've done my other book tours. And I decided not to. I decided to walk my talk and assume I was going to be resourced. And so before I do an interview like this, I do exactly that exercise I just gave you. And I straighten my spine and I allow information to just kind of flow through me. And I am in no way a perfect person at all. I'm so flawed, and I'm working hard on my less worked out bits, but I'm on my journey, and I grew hugely by writing this book. And people tell me they grow by reading it, which is, I think, not thanks to me. It kind of came through me rather than from me. It's thanks to the energy, the Tao, the matrix of intelligence energy, source energy, that is still resourcing us and is still abundant, even in times that feel very difficult, like the ones we're living in now.
Yes.
And so I am prompted to kind of walk my talk, albeit imperfectly, and inspire other people to open up to this, because in my own life, this has helped me hugely. And if I tell you that before this weird course correction we did happen, in the year after my book came out, we opened 2 further Unova centers. It was like I was able to access abundance. And I still am. I'm just working out how to do it in this new version of our world and of ourselves, be it temporary or, I do think the world will be changed forever by this. And it's very shocking to think of it. But once we've regrouped, a bit like our beloved fertility patients who have to accept information and then innovative, here we are. We've got a big no from the world.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to get a yes to the next greatest and grandest version of ourselves. And I'm struggling with that as much as anybody.
Yes, but your intention is pure. It really comes down to, of course, we're all imperfect, but we have intentions, and if the intention is aligned with light and goodness, I feel like that's all that matters. And another thing is, I was kind of thinking, I have a feeling that a lot of people that have been struggling with fertility will spontaneously do amazing because they're getting rested and they don't have all the stressors that they normally have in life. And they have more time to spend with their loved ones.
Yes, I mean, we're about to offer the Making Babies material combined with our self services. So still came for their 3 months. It's a 3-month program. We could help them get into amazing shape. Yeah. I agree. They're going to, the national slowdown may have benefits in amongst all the difficulties.
And how can people find you? I'm sure many people already know, but
you can buy Energy Medicine, The Science and Mystery of Healing at any indie bookstore that is still working. Let's support the indies, but also, at all the big online bookstores, traditional ones. The Unova Center is still running, and we're virtual, but we're there. You can go to us at www.unovacenter.com. We're updating our blog with helpful information. We're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest. We have a good Pinterest boards, particularly on Insta. We are doing live videos. Our team are cooking online, and we're about to start doing self-massage and things like that. So stay connected to us, sign up for our newsletter, and we'll keep you up to date with what we're doing. And we launch virtual consultations today, and we'll start launching virtual fertility courses in the very near future. And we will see you, if not in person, we'll see online.
And I will have all of this information on the episode notes, all the books and the website and everything, if anybody wants to go back and look.
Lovely. Well, it's been a joy to talk to you, and let's stay in touch.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on.